Hvordan vil fremtidens energimarked se ut? Vi diskuterer videre i samtale mellom James Leaton, Maria Moræus Hanssen og Stephen Bull. Og til å moderere samtalen har vi gleden av å introdusere Stig Arild Pettersen. Ta dem hjertelig imot.
Thanks a lot. James, I'm going to start with you. I mean, you were talking about the big differences between the projections you've made in this project and what we see in other parts of academia. But I wonder about the companies. How do you explain the big differences between the projections you make and what the companies in oil-producing countries make? I mean, they don't have any incentives to run out of business, do they?
No, I mean, I think there are differences in terms of the time period you're looking at. I'm not going to say it's easy to get it right. I think Maria's right. You can guarantee to be wrong apart from anything else. But yeah, it's essentially you're putting a different probability on a certain outcome. So you may have a particular scenario and everyone's entitled to their view as to how likely that scenario is. But what we're finding, as was mentioned, is that shareholders are increasingly interested in understanding what some of these lower demand scenarios mean for the businesses. So, it's, I think, there's a difference between a kind of forecast, which I would argue is, an institution saying this is what we think is going to happen, and there are different periods they do that over. So I think the IEA would stand behind their 5-year forecast, but they would talk about a longer-term scenario as a plausible outcome, which people would give different credibility to. Yeah, and similarly, a lot of the companies produce scenarios, but it doesn't mean necessarily that's the basis for their investments. And I think that's what investors are keen to understand more about is, well, okay, what is the role of these scenarios? How does that play into your business planning? What are your assumptions going forward?
And is this what you in NG have based your decision on, Maria, to sell the exploration and production unit that you've been heading? You sold it for almost $4 billion earlier this year. Because you thought you'd run out of business with that part of the business?
No, I don't think so. I think that these big utility companies, they used to hold E&P arms and they used to hold oil and gas business as well as coal. And for them, they can move the other way. They are not fundamentally an oil and gas business. So, and there are buyers out there, so you can choose to go elsewhere. But it's also important to remember that one of the reasons they do this is that they need the money to invest in the direction that they are going. So what I think you see is a diversification. You see the utility companies becoming non-fossil, and then you see the Statoils and the Totals, breading and spreading their portfolios. And then you will see these niche companies that will remain oil and gas companies. It's not because they do not see what is coming, but they believe that, they are most capable of running that business and they will still continue to do it.
So you're saying the rationale behind NG selling its oil exploration and production unit is not that they fear a greener future, but it's a consolidating
I don't think they fear a greener future. I think they actually look forward to a greener future and they want to invest in that and they need money to do it. And then they divest what they can divest. ENGIE committed to a transformation program of 17 billion euros, So they needed to sell a lot to divest in what they wanted to go and become going forward.
Stephen, congratulations on Hywind, which opened a couple of weeks ago, as we heard. One thing is being first on these things, building the ideas, building the technology. But offshore floating wind farms is something completely else than building oil rigs. Do you think Statoil is prepared for being a leader in that market once it becomes more of a production business than innovation?
Well, just to kind of correct you on that politely, it's actually oil and gas technology from the water surface down. So this is a spar buoy concept that we use. It's floating. That's what you use for rigs all over the world. You use mooring anchor systems, suction anchors, all the technology that we use in the Gulf of Mexico to Norway to you name it in the world. Above that is the green part. It's the turbine itself. So The brainwork behind it is actually marrying the oil and gas technology with renewables itself, then adding those X factors like algorithms, how to manage the pitch control mechanisms, how to make these things work. But there's 40 different floating types of concepts throughout the whole world, actually, believe it or not. There's probably only space for 2 or 3 of them. We think we have really an edge on this, but also, I can piggyback off the oil and gas team. If we were a small independent startup company, we would never get Hywind Scotland moving because we have Statoil on our back, and that really helps.
There's no doubt that this kind of energy production will be the margins will be much smaller than in oil.
Depends where you look in oil. No, oil is the same. If it's offshore, deep water, ultra deep, is it shale? Is it heavy oil? It varies a lot, and it's a risk-reward structure for this, and that's what we use in our own modeling itself when we are comparing our projects from new energy solutions to the oil and gas guys. Then we're looking at different rates of return expected, but also different risk factors, above ground, below ground risk. It's important to have a nuanced discussion around those things.
There's no doubt that you're part of the Statoil family is growing really fast. You're making big investments, but when you think we'll see Statoil making the step that NG has been making this year, selling
Hopefully never. We want to stay in the company. This is part of a general energy transition for Statoil. I think we do better in our oil and gas business because we've got new energy solutions as part of it.
So finally, on that point, when are we going to see the first floating wind park in Norway?
We'll see. The government has put out some ideas around for Enova support as necessary. We'd like to see a demo. We're playing with ideas ourselves and thinking around that.
But what does it take from the political side for Statoil to make that step?
Political support and to help the rest of the industry and the supply chain.
But I think it's important to remember that, especially looking from the outside, Norway is such an energy-rich country. I don't know if we need floating wind, we have the hydropower, and we have perfect conditions, according to experts in my companies, for onshore wind. So it's maybe not where you need to build floating wind. But going out there and do that where it actually fits the purpose, I think it's a great opportunity.
Yeah, this is for oil and gas installations. If you want to reduce the CO2, and let's face it, most of the CO2 comes from burning gas on a platform to produce power. Pretty much that's the answer. You want to put in floating wind turbines there to reduce the amount of gas burnt, so you actually have less emissions. There's a possibility there, but as Maria said, to produce floating wind power into Norway, the prices we have today, you have hydropower that outcompetes it completely.
Maria, you're moving from one oil executive job to another. Do you believe in James's assumptions for peak oil demand?
I need to be careful here, officially
Please
I shouldn't have a view on oil. Yes, I am, as I said in my presentation, I am one of those that believe that the oil price will trend downwards over time. We will see peaks still, we may see another peak now, actually, this is a lot based on imperfect situations in the market and so forth. But I think that oil demand will level off and eventually go down. But I see that for energy as such, I honestly believe that going forward we will see that we can have economic growth without a growing energy demand, a lot due to energy efficiency. So for me, it's about being competitive. I honestly believe that the oil and gas company has a bit of a reputational problem. But the other thing is that we need to step up to the competition. This is going to be about staying profitable. And for that, we need to sharpen our competences and use technology a lot more than before.
Just briefly on that, is it a reputational problem, really? Or is it really a problem about what you're doing?
Yes and no. Yes and no. But as I was saying in my presentation, the oil and gas industry is extremely important. And in many ways, it's even more important that we do this correctly going forward, because we all see the same challenges. But I think one of the largest challenges that you have as a leader in the oil and gas business is to manage to recruit talent going forward. How are you going to make that situation attractive? But if you go to Europe, and I think you tend to forget that in Norway, there's a big coal industry out there, And I think from a Norwegian perspective, we have actually a hard time imagining that there's an industry. The coal industry is a big industry. The oil and gas industry will remain for many years to come, and we need to continue to recruit.
And James, the argument made here in Norway often by the oil and gas companies, but also by the government, is that Norwegian gas is very clean and will use it to stop the demand for coal, which is much worse. How does that fit into your scenarios? Do you see that in your predictions?
I mean, I think...
And what do you think about the arguments?
I mean, I think, you've got a big zero behind us, so zero, unless you've got CCS that's competitive, once you've added on that extra cost, you can't have, gas may be a temporary part of the solution, but people have been talking about, the gas as a transition fuel for the last, couple of decades, and we haven't really seen it come through for a variety of reasons. So I think maybe its time is running out in a sense that, we've already seen gas plants being built and they're not being used because they're already not fitting into the new market structures. So, yes, gas can be cheaper up to a point, but it doesn't take you all the way down to where you need to be. But I think this is a whole challenge around comparing kind of existing capacity versus new capacity and new versus new. It's not the same comparison, because where you have existing assets and existing workforces and pensions and liabilities, there's a whole transition aspect there that you do need to think about. But I think, as we've heard, it's this uncertainty around where do we put capital going forward, which is really posing a challenge, and that applies to gas as well, particularly where we've seen companies say, well, we're going to increase our exposure to gas. Well, how do you do that? Either you have to pay the market price, acquire a company, but then perhaps it's actually quite expensive LNG options, which again requires more energy to convert it back and forth to LNG, and actually there's actually a queue already forming for the LNG market. There's already a decade worth of capacity in the pipeline, as it were. So unless you do see that growth in demand, you can't actually realize the potential of those projects. So gas is by no means a certainty, I don't think, as an investment, and not all gas is the same.
We heard Maria obviously not believing fully in your scenario for peak oil demand. Give a shot at sort of persuading her.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'd certainly agree there's different parts of the barrel, and the EV part is only the light vehicle part of that at the moment. But I think where we've seen the market reaction to a sort of $2 million barrel difference between supply and demand already, I'd agree you could see more volatility in the market as a result, more uncertainty. And I think it comes back to, what do you tell your shareholders is the best use of their capital? We've already seen some US companies buy back shares. Does that tell the market then you haven't got anything better to do with that money, quite frankly? Do you diversify like Statoil and put it into something else, invest in the future? Or if you take some of the diversified mining companies, they've been selling off their thermal coal assets. But as we've heard, if you're a pure coal player, you don't have that option. But you're not going to talk that down whilst you're trying to sell it off. So that's the quandary with the market, is actually you might want to get a good price now and move away from it and use that money for something else.
Maria, were you persuaded?
So,
just very briefly, you have to run up.
No, I honestly believe in peak oil demand. So it's a question of how fast do we see the changes, and this is where we cannot really imagine everything that is going to happen. There are scenarios out there, and I fully agree that we tend to be way too conservative when we have disruption technology as we have today.
Just very briefly, Stephen, a couple of sentences. Where is Statoil in 2050 when it comes to the questions we're discussing here?
I think we'll still be producing oil and gas. It'll be competitive in a 2-degree scenario, which also the IPCC does see space for oil and gas there. But we're going to have a lot of surprises down the way in the portfolio, no doubt about it. Invest, buy Statoil shares.
Stephen, Maria, and James, thank you so much for participating.
Thank you.
Vi ønsker velkommen til lunsj i Zero Expo-teltet ute på Jonstorget. Programmet starter opp igjen 1:15.